Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be going through 10 essential jazz rock albums, and I'm going to be ranking those albums. But what makes this list so special is these are 10 essential jazz rock albums that I bet you don't own. I know I don't own a lot of these and they're very hard to get copies of, but these are 10 incredible jazz rock albums. A few days ago, I released a video called something like 10 albums that the music critics think are great, but I think is crap. And that's actually premiered last night. And 12 hours later, I had a look at it, and it was just coming up to 30,000 views. This is going to be one of the biggest videos I've ever done. And all the comments are saying, oh, this bloke's, you know, just moaning about stuff. He doesn't say anything positive. I know, it's true. But the real hardcore viewers of this channel are watching this video now, and this will get nowhere near 30,000 views in 12 hours. So for all of you watching, I thank you very much. And you know what the real deal of this channel is about. And hopefully those of you who are here supporting me talking about these incredible artists that aren't going to get spoken about on any other YouTube video appreciate the fact that we're here able to do this because of these silly videos I make where I moan about Bruce Springsteen and how much I hate him, when in reality I'm quite indifferent to Bruce Springsteen. But I'm not indifferent to these artists. This is some incredible albums. So for jazz rock fans out there, there's going to be a whole ton of stuff I hope you can get very excited about. And I'm going to be playing you bits from the album as well. So not only will nobody watch this, it'll get demonetized as well. So shall we get straight on? So at number 10, I have Roland, Vasquez, and his incredible album, which came out in 1979, which is called the Urban Music Ensemble. I'll say that again because I said music. The Urban Music Ensemble. Now, you're probably aware that I'm having to look down to the side just to get certain information here, because even with my encyclopedic knowledge of jazz rock fusion, I still don't know this stuff. So, these are albums that I've discovered through the channel, suggestions from people in the comments, and do my own research. And these are just some corker albums. Now, Roland Vasquez is still around. He's got a website. If you go to the website, you will see he's actually put on his website the fact that the last time I mentioned him, and I have been in touch with him on the channel. This album that he made in '79 is just, it's so funky and intense. So towards the back end of the 70s, jazz rock had turned into jazz rock fusion. It was vying for popularity by bringing more disco beats in, funk beats. A lot of this music can be very tepid, and I have criticised it on this channel. But of course, I am a huge funk fan. I think if I could only listen to one genre for the rest of my life, it would be funk. And sometimes you get certain albums at this period that are, they're fusion, they're disco-y and they're funky, but they're so intense in their funkiness, and they've got proper burning soloing, and this is what this album's like. So Roland Vasquez first started out as a drummer, and he played in rhythm and blues bands, he played in rock bands in and out of LA. He started to write for different jazz fusion bands around about the mid-70s. He got a grant in 1977, which helped him get off the ground and set up this thing called the Urban Ensemble. And they brought an album out in 1979 called The Music of Roland Vasquez, and this is the album, and it sounds like this. So as you can hear, very intense, very funky. I think Roland Vasquez's background as a drummer first, he has an approach to rhythm which is very intense, incredible stuff. He has been in touch with me. I would love to interview him on the channel. And this is the main reason why I'm doing this video, is that some of these people are still around, and I would love to, try and, resurrect a little bit of interest in these incredible albums. At the time, Billboard said that this album was a decade ahead of its time, that it was like, they described it as funky salsa bebop, which I think is right. So the reviews were really great, but it just didn't quite catch, not in the same way as a Herbie Hancock, or who else was around that, Spyro Gyra. But for me, this stuff's much more intense, much more exciting, and much more danceable in a way. So that's what I've got at number 10, is the Urban Music Ensemble plays the music of Roland Vasquez. Shall we move on to number 9? At number 9, we have a French group called Raan. And they were formed in the mid-70s, around about 1977. This is a really interesting jazz rock fusion album. The best way of describing this would be a cross between Zool, like the music of Magma, and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This is incredible stuff. If there's any Mahavishnu fans out there, this is almost like an essential purchase, and it sounds a bit like this. The musicians on this album are interesting. We've got Lisa Deluxe from Magma, we've got Gerard Prevost from Zao, and most notably for us fusion aficionados, we've also got Didier Lockwood, who is one of the great jazz violinists who did some incredible fusion, especially around about this time, and also worked with Magma. Right, so there is this is exploring this line between, the sort of the sort of Coltrane mixed with what's he called, the one that goes Karloff, that thing. That's what Magma sounds like to me. Now Magma on certain albums, they do go towards pretty heavy funky jazz rock fusion, so this is a really interesting area of fusion that I know very little about. The central player on this album, I would say, is Muhammad Hadi's guitar. This is where the Mahavishnu Orchestra influence comes in, but this layered with bouzouki, oud, and this has got a Middle Eastern African sound to it, which makes it absolutely unique. Like I said, I think they brought out, it might only be one album actually, and this is the album. So that's about as much as I can tell you. If anyone's got any more information about this band, Raan, then please put it in the comments below, because hopefully people will know a little bit more about it, especially people from France. And now, as we move to number 8 on this list, we come across another band that I know absolutely nothing about, and rather than being a French band, it's an Italian band, and they are called Il Baricentro. Right, they make instrumental jazz rock fusion. Again, they emerged in the mid-70s. Apparently, a lot of the members of this band started off in a previous progressive rock band from Italy called Festa Mobile. Right, this band did only make 2 albums, studio albums, and the one I'm featuring is the first album that they made, which I think is just has a slight edge on the second album, and it's called Soncerto. Anyway, it sounds a bit like this. Right, so I'm going to have to read you what I've got here. They only made 2 studio records between 1960, first in 1976, second in 1978. The lineup is Francesco Boccucci on keyboards, guitars and percussion. Vanni Boccucci on keyboards and percussion. They're obviously related, most likely brothers. Tonio Napolitano on bass and percussion. And bizarrely on drums, a guy called Piero Mangini. Now, is this bloke related to Mike Mangini from Dream Theater? I did try and find out to see if this was the case. It would be incredible if it is. On the second album, they added 2 percussionists, but this first album is a little bit more heavier. So we can hear elements of Italian prog, PFM. We've got, it sounds a bit Brand X-y, a little bit sort of Bill Bruford, that same type of period. Pretty intense, pretty, great. And the only thing that I struggle with some of these albums is some of the soloing. And it's not because they aren't great soloists, it's just because I don't know those soloists. A lot of the big fusion bands like Return to Vera Mavish Orchestra, they have these iconic soloists like Wayne Shorter or Chick Corea. Whereas these I don't know, and it seems like, and I think this also handicapped a lot of the British jazz rock bands as well, is not having the soloists drawn from the sort of heart of American jazz. But to me, it sounds pretty great. But I think the thing I'm trying to describe, which I'm describing very badly, is the fact that some of this may be a little bit derivative, as most non-American jazz tends to be. They're following in the footsteps of the masters. So that's what we've got at number 7, right? Now, at number 6, we've got an album which is one of my favourite albums of all time. I bought this as a very young guy. I was actually walking through a town somewhere, can't remember where it was, and I saw a shop selling electrical goods, and I went in there to have a mooch about, and they'd got a CD, some second-hand CDs for sale, and they had a whole bunch of ECM albums, and this is where I started my love of ECM, because I think I grabbed, they're only back £3 or £4 each, and they grabbed a whole bunch of different ECM albums, discovering a whole bunch of different ECM artists. Without doubt, the most avant-garde, the most way out of all these albums, and the most unknown to me was this album that is called, and I want to get this correct, even though I've been listening to it for like 40 years, it's called Red Twist Arrow. It's not called that, is it? It's called Red Twisted Arrow, I think. I can't remember the title of it. You're looking at the cover right now, so you can see what it's called. It features 3 giants of European improvisational music. On guitar, we have Christy Doran, free jazz guitarist, who I think is from Ireland. We also have on another guitar, so we've got 2 guitars, is Stefan Wittwer. And on drums, we have the late great Freddie Studer, who died, I think it was the year before last. This is an album of very intense, almost like proggy mixed with free jazz compositions for drums and 2 guitar. It's unlike anything else I've ever heard. It's without doubt jazz rock, but it's way beyond jazz rock. This is an absolutely unique album, and it sounds like this. There's so many interesting. The little snippet you've had of this doesn't give breadth to what this album's like. Every single track is different. Sometimes it's exploring sort of minimalist approaches. Sometimes there's some really funky parts and strange hits and kicks in the music. There's a lot of free improvisation there. The two guitars weave together in a really interesting way. I think Stefan Wittner's playing guitar synth on here, and they also use effects and other devices to expand out, but it sounds like it's been pretty much recorded live in the room. This was recorded around about 1986, right in the middle of some of the worst jazz fusion that was ever being made in the history of jazz fusion. You know what 80s jazz fusion was like? So this ranks as being one of the greatest jazz rock fusion albums of the 1980s, without a doubt. This is an essential album to me. It's really, really unknown. After I got this album, I did explore some of the music of Freddie Studer, and I might actually cover that on the channel. I would love to talk about this stuff more, but obviously it does not get the views. But if anyone is really interested in these musicians and want to know more, we can explore this together. So that's what I've got at number 7. Is Red Twisted Arrow, I think, by the trio of Doran, Wittner and Studer. Right, what have we got at number 6? At number 6, I've got an album by Steve Grossman. Now, Steve Grossman was the saxophone player on Jack Johnson by Miles Davis. A seminal album, which also featured Billy Cobham on drums and John McLaughlin on guitar. Of course, being featured on a Miles Davis album, it puts you in the stellar category, doesn't it? And even Michael Henderson, who was the bass player on that album, later on had crossover success as a sort of disco funk artist, and I've featured him on this channel before because there's a terrible album I think called Slipstream where he has a very small pair of swimming trunks on.
Oh no, you don't.
But that's by the by, and has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. So Steve Grossman also in the early 70s, after playing with Miles, starts to make some solo albums, and he makes an album called Some Shapes to Come. This album was made, I think, around about 1973-74. The lineup is pretty incredible. So we've got Steve Grossman on tenor saxophone and soprano saxophone, Don Elias on drums, congas, bongos, and bells. So that's all. Isn't that what they say in Wizard of Oz? Congas, bongos, and bells, oh my. These are terrible jokes, aren't they? They're like dad jokes. What? I've lost my sense of humour. Oh my God, that'll be terrible if that happens. We've got the great Gene Perla on electric bass, who was an original consideration for the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And on keyboards, we have Jan Hammer, who is playing not only electric piano, but also synthesizer Moog. Now, I'm not too sure of the date. I know it's early 70s. Of course, Jan Hammer acquires the Moog synth in 72, so this is going to be 73, 74. And I would imagine it's 74 because Jan Hammer would have been really, involved in the huge amount of gigging at the Mahavishnu Orchestra. So let's see if that's right. You can check that one out. See if I've been able to do it with my sort of Sherlock Holmes, my jazz rock Sherlock Holmes techniques. Now, the eagle-eyed of you, or the knowledgeable, would know that this band of Don Elias, Gene Perla and Jan Hammer was actually the band a few years earlier for Jeremy Steege, the great jazz flutist, who made some incredible early 70s jazz rock fusion albums, which I think are essential. If they're essential, Andy, why aren't they on this list? Because I've talked about it before. There's an album called Energy by that group. But this one is even more further out. Do you want to hear what it sounds like? It sounds like this. that funky post bitches brew approach to playing. It's got the influence of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and with Jan Hammer's signature Moog sound, it just elevates it up so high, which is why this is high up on the list. It's Jan Hammer for me. He's one of the greats. And Jan Hammer's own solo material, although he often flies and plays a whole ton of keyboards, where do you go to hear Jan Hammer completely unfettered? Well, it would be a Mahavishnu Orchestra bootleg, wouldn't it? But that has a sort of high-speed intensity. This has something else. This is like Jan Hammer playing with the Miles Davis group. It's got a sort of jazz freedom to it. Now, another set of albums you should go and check out if you were interested in this is the albums that Jan Hammer made with Elvin Jones. They are also incredible. There's a whole glut of albums in here that occupy a certain space in jazz rock fusion. But I think this one, which is really unknown, is the best one of the bunch. So that is what we have got at number 6. Now, usually on one of my lists of essential jazz rock albums, I do give precedent to albums that are pioneering in their approach. And sometimes I will evaluate innovation above, say, technical mastery. I think sometimes hearing musicians at the forefront of a genre is very, very exciting. Now, there's one guy that was so important to the development of jazz rock fusion that has gone unmentioned, an absolute genius, and that's the keyboardist Barry Miles. Now, some of you will know Barry Miles as being the keyboardist on... I'm just checking it. Being the keyboardist on the Al Di Meola albums. He's on a number of Al Di Meola albums, and he plays in a very signature synthesizer way, which is different to Jan Hammer. Now, Barry Miles, I think, first signed the record deal when he was very young, in the early 60s. And he brought out an album of sort of post-bebop jazz. And I feel he may have been a drummer. I haven't got any notes for Barry Miles. I'm going on what I can remember. Anyway, towards the end of the 60s, he starts making jazz rock fusion albums. He's one of the first musicians to do it. They're very experimental, they're very interesting. And it's very interesting how Barry Miles is approaching utilising heavy jazz improvisation within a rock setting. It's very interesting. He's got his own approach. And one of the things that he brings in like an almost orchestral approach to arrangement. I can hear on these early Barry Miles albums a certain aspect that I hear later on in Return to Forever. And I wonder how much these albums were an influence on Chick Corea. Now, when I interviewed Al Di Meola, he spoke at length about Barry Miles and said how important he was. Al Di Meola played with Barry Miles before Return to Forever, and I wonder whether that experience for Al Di Meola set him up to be able to deal with what that band was doing, because obviously Al Di Meola comes at 19 years old and he's playing stuff that is really laying the groundwork for very intense like prog metal and speed metal and a whole host of things. And I think it comes from Barry Miles' mentorship. So this album, you should check all the Barry Miles albums. Like I said, there's some albums from the mid-70s where he is just burning. It's incredible stuff. But this album, which is from 1971, right, is such a pioneering album. It's called White Heat, and it sounds like this. The lineup on this is on bass, both upright and electric, is Victor Gaskin. On congas, we got Warren Smith. On drums, Terry Silverlight. On keyboards, we've got, of course, got Barry Miles. On saxophone, we've got Lou Tobakin, and all the tracks are composed by Barry Miles. Now, what's interesting is we've got two guitarists on here. We've got John Abercrombie and Pat Martino. Now, of course, Pat Martino is one of the great jazz guitarists of the 1970s and didn't do that many jazz rock albums. In fact, he did one jazz rock album, which is called something Lake. I can't quite remember. It's an absolute classic. What's it called? Joyous Lake. But Pat Martino is far more known for playing, more straight jazz styles. And the other guitarist on here is John Abercrombie. Now, as I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of John Abercrombie, and I felt his sort of wah-wah drenched solos in the Billy Cobham bands were a bit tiresome, even though they're some of my favourite albums. But go and check John Abercrombie out on here. This is the point where John Abercrombie is at that crossroads of jazz rock, where he's a jazz guitarist, he's got a certain vocabulary, he's really come out of someone like Jim Hall, and he's negotiating his way in this sort of high-powered, intense jazz fusion setting. And it's very interesting. And Pat Martino is in the same place, and they do some very, very interesting guitar playing. And for me, at that time, where the rules of jazz rock guitar playing hadn't really been established, we're really coming out of Larry Coryell, and then John McLaughlin comes along and sort of goes, this is the way you do it. What they're doing on this album is very, very interesting. So that is what I have at number 5. At number 4, I have, by Herman Szobel, the album Szobel. Now, I have done so many videos on this album. This album came out in, I think, 1976. It featured this, not child prodigy, but very young prodigious keyboardist called Herman Szobel on piano. He'd written all the stuff. He arrived in New York, sort of an unknown, got discovered very quickly, and this album was made very quickly. He pulled in a band that featured Michael Viseglia on bass, Bob Goldman on drums, Dave Samuels, the great Dave Samuels on percussion, marimba and vibraphone, and Vadim Vyadro on tenor saxophone, clarinet. This band sort of worked in a bit like a key Captain Beefheart Trap Bass replica scenario. They ended up spending a year in some rehearsal rooms working on this album. It's one of the most incredible jazz rock albums ever made. It's also one of the most incredible progressive rock albums ever made. If you want to know what it sounds like, it's somewhere between the free jazz of John Coltrane and Frank Zappa. That's where it resides. Herman Szobel is obviously a genius. Now, I have spoken about Herman Szobel on this channel at length, right? To the point where I think, us here on this channel talking about Herman Szobel has actually elevated his sort of profile in the world. And why is that? And the reason is because the story behind this album, I think, is perhaps the most insane and interesting story behind any album in the history of rock and roll. Right? They should make a film about this. And if they ever make a film about this, I'll be in the film because I've actually played a small part in this story. But I'm going to give you a very quick go through this story. Now I'm going to run it again because I know since I covered this a few years ago, we've got a lot more people watching this channel. So I will tell you the story of Herman Szobel. Herman Szobel was born in Austria. He was related to Bill Graham, the American promoter that used to promote the gigs at the Fillmore. As a 17-year-old, he decides to buy a ticket to America. He arrives in New York. He rings up Uncle Bill, and Bill says, you know, I can show you around. And he ends up in a recording studio with Roberta Flack, who I think at that time is recording Feels Like Making Love. And he sort of walks into that session, and he tells them that he's the greatest pianist in the world. Very Jaco Pastorius type of statement. And they sort of have a laugh at him and say, well, there's a piano there, and he sits down and plays it, and it turns out he probably is. So he gets offered a deal. Not just a deal, he gets offered a major label deal with Arista. They put quite some budget into it, and he puts this band together with these incredible musicians, and they work this album up. And then they go into the studio, they are rehearsed to death, and they are able to pull off a real miracle, because this stuff is insane. The album comes out. Herman Szobel, I think, expects this to like change the face of music in the same way Weather Report did in the Mavish Structure, and it goes nowhere. They start working on a second album, but at this point, his view of himself, which he seems to have had a very similar approach to music to Jaco Pastorius. I'm researching Jaco at the moment. I'm seeing similar things of a certain incredible energy associated with creativity, which it almost seems like high, like superiority complex almost. Narcissism could be the way it's described as. And I don't think it's that. And I want to explore this more, because I don't think that's what it is. Anyway, his expectations are not met by what happens around him, and he seems to go downhill. Before we know it, this guy disappears off the face of the earth. And when I say disappears off the face of the earth, he disappears off the face of the earth. His mother actually registers him as a missing persons, and they don't find him. He's gone. There's whispers of him around in America in certain towns throughout the 80s, but before we know it, he's absolutely gone. No one knows what's happened to him. He's probably died. Who knows? About 10 years ago, a documentary filmmaker arrived in Jerusalem to look at this thing, which I think is called the Messiah syndrome or the Jesus Christ syndrome. And it's about people who go to Jerusalem and, think that they are the Messiah. And she interviews this guy that is living in a cave and, he's drinking rainwater. And he sits down and said he used to be a musician and he made an album and blah, blah, blah. And people... The documentary filmmakers don't realise this, but once the documentary comes out, people go, is this Herman Szobel? So there's these rumours that he's living out in Jerusalem doing all this stuff. Anyway, I did a video about this album because I thought it was incredible. I reached out. The album had actually been put out by Laser's Edge, who I knew, and I spoke to them. And I think we managed to sell the last few copies of that CD for them. I looked into all the people who played on the album, and they were all dead except for Michael Viseglia, who had gone on to become the bass player with Suzanne Vega and played on her hit records, including Luca. I reached out to Mike, and he has been on the channel a number of times, and we've discussed this. Anyway, around about this time last year, I had a message from Mike, and he said, "You're not going to believe this. I've just spoken to Herman on the phone." Apparently the video and all the stuff that we'd done on this channel had got to him, and he had managed to find someone with a phone, and he rang up Michael Viseglia, and the last I heard, he had gone to New York and met up, and they actually went into a room and played. Now, this channel's bigger now, and I'm putting this story out there, and I hope a few people who haven't heard this story are going to go, oh my God, this is mad, and you can go back and look at all the older videos. And if Michael Viseglia is watching this, get in touch again and give us another recap. I'd love to talk to you again, because Michael's a serious bass player, and all the interviews he's done have been absolutely so interesting, because he's got this other career doing all this other incredible stuff. So I really would like to get Mike back on. So hopefully he's watched this and he'll give me a message to that effect. So that's what we've got at number 4 is the album Szobel by Herman Szobel. What could be better than that album? We've got 3 masterpieces here, I think. At number 3, I've got the album by John Serry Jr. called Jazzes. Now, I've got another video on the channel that states it's called something like the greatest jazz rock album you've never heard of. And it's John Serry Jr.'s first album called Exhibition. I heard this and I was blown away. And it's very similar to the album we started out with, the album by Roland Vasquez, the Urban Music Ensemble. This is late 70s funky fusion. It's got sort of disco elements, but it's also got very intense arrangement methods. And again, John Serry, like Roland Vasquez, started out as a drummer, but he's also a keyboard player. And the rhythms are incredible. He's got an incredible lineup on that album, Exhibition, which came out in 1979. And this album blew me away so much that I ignored the one that follows it up that he made in the early 80s, I think about 81, 82, which is called Jazzes. In fact, the magazine Jazzes is named after this album. And this album gets even less love than Exhibition. The lineup on it is very similar to the first album. I think they got Carlos Vega on drums on the first album. On this album, we've got the great Peter Erskine on drums. It's an insane album, right? I've got some notes here about John Serry Jr. So he was actually born John Serry Jr. and he's an American jazz pianist and composer. One of my heroes, the drummer Mark Mondesir, is actually in touch with John Serry Jr. and he actually contacted him about me promoting his stuff on the album, which is absolutely incredible. John Serry Jr. is a composer and he's worked in contemporary classical music, and he has a sort of interest in orchestral percussion. So if you can imagine something really funky like Headhunters, but mixed with a sort of almost like Zappa-like orchestral percussion, you start to get an idea what this album's like. Do you want to hear it? Here it is. He is the son, John Serry Jr. is the son of the accordionist and composer John Serry. As I said, he brought out his debut solo album called Exhibition in 1979. That came out on Chrysalis Records. And it got a Grammy nomination, but it didn't have that much success. He also got a nomination for the composition Sabotage, which is one of the incredible compositions on that album. The lineup on that was Carlos Vega on drums. You can see I'm reading it now, so I was right. We've got Jimmy Johnson on bass, Gordon Johnson on bass, Bob Shepherd on saxophone, Barry Finnerty on guitar for the Brecker Brothers band. His second album came actually out in 1980, so I got that date wrong. It received 4 stars from Downbeat magazine. This album is perhaps... How can I describe it? The Exhibition has this sort of tight, funky sound, and it's very funky and it's very pyrotechnical. This one is more considered. John Serry's compositions are wider and there's a bigger breadth to them. It still does all the virtuoso funk sort of explorations, but there's more to it than that. It's more considered. That's what I'd say. It's equal to Exhibition. It's an absolute masterpiece. I believe that John Serry in the 90s then made a third album, solo album with Mark Mondesir on drums. Anyway, this is an incredible album, and so I'm very happy to be able to shine some light on this incredible album, bringing us to number 2 on my list, which is the album, and this is another album on ECM Records. It is by Julian Priester, and it is called Love, Love, and it sounds like this. I would place this album in the sort of post-Bitches Brew area. So Bitches Brew comes out in this sort of 69, 70. It's heralded as the great fusion between jazz and rock music, but what it's pioneering isn't taken up by jazz rock fusion. Within a year, John McLaughlin's come out with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. That takes a completely different tangent. Now, the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Tony Williams' lifetime before it is coming out of the experimentation that's going on in Miles Davis's band. But the avenues and areas that they're exploring on Bitches Brewing in a silent way get taken up by a number of artists in the early 70s. Most predominantly will be Weather Report with their early albums and the Mwandishi Band by Herbie Hancock. But there is a genre around here of what I call post-Bitches Brew jazz rock. This album by Julian Priester is exploring that area, and I think it's one of the greatest. I think it's greater than any of the Mwandishi albums, and they are incredible. Sextant is insane. You know, these incredible albums, but here, this is so focused. Now, the lineup on this is, let's have a look, is Julian Priester on trombone, horns, whistles, flute, and percussion synthesizer. We've got Pat Gleason, who was working on synthesizer programming with Herbie Hancock in the Mwandishi Band. We've got Hadley Kalaman on flute, saxophone, clarinet. We've got Muganda David Johnson on flute and saxophone. And we have the incredible Bill Connors on guitar. Now, Bill Connors is a legend in jazz rock fusion. He plays on the first Return to Forever album. Then he plays on the Stanley Clarke's second solo album. He blew us all away when we heard it. And then he makes themes for Guardian on ECM Records. And he sort of ditches the electric jazz rock fusion guitar playing for this sort of acoustic approach, which is beautiful and incredible. In the 80s, he returns to electric guitar and sounds very similar to Alan Holdsworth. And although I love Alan Holdsworth, I was like, where's Bill Connors gone? Where's that gut-wrenching, in-your-face, tear your eyes out the sockets thing that he was doing? Now, Bill Connors is on this album not playing like that, but playing close to that. So this is a very important album for me, which is why I've got it so high. It's the fact that Bill Connors is on electric guitar. On electric bass, we've got Ron McClure, who had played in a lot of the early fusion bands in the 60s. We've got Bayete Umbro Zindinko on piano and clavinet. And most importantly, and also there's a guy called... they've all got these African names like Mwandishi, so I've got to say this. Niimbo Henry Franklin on electric bass, he's on track 2, and Ron McClure is on track 1. I think there's only 2 tracks on this album, it's just these 2 long jams. What's most incredible is that we have, on drums, 2 drummers, Ndugu Leon Chancellor, who later sort of came to fame playing with Santana, and then I think Michael Jackson in the end, and the great Eric Gravatt, who here in 1973 by this point has now got his own African name of Kamal Eric Gravatt. Now, Eric Gravatt, again, is one of these musicians that have appeared on I Sing the Body Electric. Joe Zawinul went on to say this is possibly the greatest pure jazz drummer that ever came through our band. And later on they had Ndugu, he plays on tail spinning. Ndugu's a funky player. Eric Gravatt is sort of a post-Elvin Jones type player, and they're playing at the same time, and those drums are affected, and it is incredible. And so this album is not only mind-blowing, it's not only one of the greatest expositions of the post-Bitches Brew sort of approach to jazz rock, but it also features these 2 drummers, and it features Eric Gravatt with Bill Connors. Why is this album not known? Now, who the hell's Julian Priester? Julian Priester is a musician that was born in 1935. I think he's still going, so he's going to be coming into his 90th year this year. And he emerged out of the sort of free jazz, I would say he's coming out of the sort of art ensemble, Roswell Rudd, Carla Bley, that sort of the stuff that came out of Chicago, the free jazz that came out of Chicago. He's a little older and he's an avant-garde player. He hits the fusion thing and he decides to make this fusion album in the 1970s. He then goes on to play in Dave Holland's incredible group in the 1980s, one of the most important jazz, when I'd say jazz rock groups, because it's there, but it's swinging acoustic, free jazz rock in the 1980s. He's a very important player, and he's a legend of sort of free jazz trombone playing. I wish I could tell you a little bit more about him. I know him from albums by Michael Mantler, I think. I wish I could pull some more out of this old brain of mine, but I think that's about all you're going to get. Right, so that's what I've got at number 2. And I'm sure proper jazz rock fans are just drooling at the mouth at the stuff I've played you today, especially that one. And running to YouTube and Spotify to hear it. So what have I got at number 1? I think this is one of the greatest jazz rock albums ever made, right? And I believe that it is, right, I have missed this off my greatest jazz rock albums list because it was so obscure and I didn't know about it till recently. This is insane. This album is by Eddie Henderson, right? Now, Eddie Henderson, as we said, was the, well, I haven't said it, but I'll tell you now, is the trumpet player that was in the Morandisci band with Herbie Hancock. And this album is pretty much the Morandisci band. Now, the Morandisci band is so important in jazz rock, and those albums are incredible. And I think it was the finest purveyors of that sort of post-pitch brew jazz rock. But as I just said, the Julian Priester stuff's much more interesting. But of that band, the greatest album by the Morandisci band is not Sextant, it's not Morandisci, it's not the other one. With the old man on the front on the boat going across the lake. Crossings. It's all in there, you just got to wait. So I'll tell you, it's getting worse as I get older. You have to just wait. It's like I'm like a computer, a good trusty computer, but me processor chips are just a bit slow. You just have to wait, that's all. So this is the Morandisci band. This album called Realisation came out in 1973. It was released on the Capricorn label, not a great label, which is probably why it didn't get the profile it deserved. There's a review by Richard S. Gunnell for AllMusic, and he said this. This is one of the great lost treasures of jazz rock era. The music is a bit looser than that of the Herbie Hancock records, yet every bit as invigorating and forward thrusting. And this is without doubt the best, I think. The lineup: Eddie Henderson trumpet, Bernie Maupin on bass, clarinet, flute and saxophones, Herbie Hancock on electric piano, Patrick Gleason on synthesizer organ, Buster Williams on bass, Billy Hart drums, and the addition of the great Lenny White on drums, who at this point in time had played on Bitches Brew and was just about to make a name with himself, redoing the drums in place of Steve Gadd on the first Return to Forever album. And Realisation sounds like this. So that has been my 10 greatest essential unknown jazz rock albums, and I hope for hardcore viewers of this channel who've clicked on this, I have been able to restate my position of not just being the silly old man that shouts about how much he hates Bruce Springsteen. And that's the reason why I did this video. I thought, I'm going to go back to some heaviness. Let's go back to where we started on the channel. And I'm going to try and do both. I do a lot of videos, so those complaining that I only do the sort of clickbaity stuff, it's because they're only watching that. We have videos like this, so I hope that has appeased, and there'll be more of this to come. More to come, I promise you. So, it's the new year. It's not the new year here, it's actually December the 27th today. But this will be coming out in the new year. So I wish you all a happy new year. I like this period much more than Christmas. I like once Christmas is out of the way, we get into the new year and we can start to think ahead and look ahead and think about all the incredible things ahead of us that we can enjoy and celebrate life. And while there is something ahead of you to look forward to, you should always have hope. And that is my parting message on this video. Thanks for watching it. If you want to see more stuff like this, you need to subscribe. Put a whole bunch of comments on there. Put all the albums that you know that I won't know, and I will look into them, and they might be featured on the part 2 of this. You can also come and support me over on Patreon, and the link's down below to that. You can put some money in my PayPal tip jar. And those who gave me a little Christmas present at Christmas, I didn't get any presents. When you become a man of a certain age, the only presents and gifts I got were from the viewers of this channel. Oh, I got some socks as well and a pair of pyjamas. But that was completely dwarfed by the very kind viewers for this channel. So I thank you very much. It's all coming together at the moment. This time next year, the prediction says that this channel will be at 100,000 subscribers. It might not, it might peter off. There might be only a certain amount of sort of jazz, rock and prog fans that can stomach this type of silly video content, and it might taper off. I might reach the sort of limit, but I hope not. I hope there's enough of you out there to get to 100,000 views. If not, I'll have to become a popularist. That's the thing today, isn't it? Becoming a popularist. I'll have to do a sort of Nigel Farage, Donald Trump in video form, and I'll have to start only doing videos about how much I hate Bruce Springsteen, because that's what they like. Poor old Bruce. I've got nothing against Bruce, really. I've got nothing against those albums. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.
Oh, no, you don't. Oh, no, you don't. Oh, no, you don't. Oh, no, you don't.